Russian shelling has trapped thousands of people in besieged cities and sent 2.5 million Ukrainians fleeing to neighbouring countries. Ukraine accused Russian forces on Saturday of killing 7 civilians in an attack on women and children trying to flee fighting near Kyiv. France said Russian President Vladimir Putin had shown no readiness to end the conflict that has been almost universally condemned around the world and has drawn tough Western sanctions on Russia. As Kharkov endures daily shelling, families huddle in the hospital basement for safety. Kate Geraghty, the Ukrainian intelligence service, said the 7, including 1 child, were as they fled the village of Peremoha, and that the occupiers forced the remnants of the column to turn back. Was unable immediately to verify the report, and Russia offered no immediate comment. Moscow denies targeting civilians since invading Ukraine on February 24. It blames Ukraine for failed attempts to evacuate civilians from encircled cities, an accusation Ukraine and its Western allies strongly reject. Zelensky said Moscow was sending in new troops after Ukrainian forces put 31 of Russia's battalion tactical groups out of action in what he called Russia's largest army losses in decades. Could not verify his statements. "We still need to hold on. We still have to fight," Zelensky said in a video address late on Saturday, Ukraine time, his second of the day. Saying about 1,300 Ukrainian troops had been, he urged the West to get more involved in peace negotiations. The United States said it would rush up to $200 million in additional small arms, anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons to Ukraine, where officials have pleaded for more military aid. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said Moscow has warned the United States that Moscow could attack convoys carrying military equipment to Ukraine, calling them legitimate targets. In comments reported by the TASS news agency, Ryabkov made no specific threat. Any attack on such convoys before they reached Ukraine would risk widening the war. The Kremlin describes its actions as a special operation to disarm Ukraine and unseat leaders it calls neo-Nazis. Ukraine and Western allies call this a baseless pretext for a war of choice that has raised fears of wider conflict in Europe. A Ukrainian serviceman in Mariupol, which has been under siege for more than a week. AP Zelensky discussed the war with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and French President Emmanuel Macron, who urged Putin to order an immediate ceasefire. A Kremlin statement on their 75-minute call made no mention of a ceasefire. A French presidency official said, "We did not detect a willingness on Putin's part to end the war." Crisis talks between Moscow and Kyiv have been continuing by video link, said Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, according to Russia's RIA news agency. He gave no details, but Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said Kyiv would not surrender or accept any ultimatums. Conflict raged near the Ukrainian capital Kyiv on Saturday, as officials said heavy shelling and threats of Russian air attacks were continuing to endanger attempts to evacuate civilians from encircled towns and cities across the country. President Zelensky claimed Russia was sending in new troops after Ukrainian forces had put 31 of its battalion tactical groups out of action in what he called Russia's largest army losses in decades. He estimated that between 500 and 600 Russian troops had surrendered on Friday alone, and said about 1,300 Ukrainian troops had been since the conflict began. It was not possible to verify his statements. More than 2,000 residents of the southern city of Melitopol, which is now under Russian control, protested outside the city administration building to demand the release of the mayor. Ivan Fedorov, deputy head of the Zelensky's office, Kyrylo Tymoshenko, said. Russia has not commented on the fate of Fedorov. Zelensky said the mayor's detention was an attempt to bring the city to its knees. He said Fedorov personified Ukrainians who do not give up, and he demanded that world leaders secure the mayor's release. Evacuation attempts. Ukrainian officials had planned to use humanitarian corridors from Mariupol, as well as towns and villages in the regions of Kyiv, Sumy and some other areas on Saturday. Loading the governor of the Kyiv region, Oleksiy Kuleba, said fighting and threats of Russian air attacks were continuing on Saturday morning. "We will try to get people out every day, as long as it's possible to observe a ceasefire," he said. The Donetsk region's governor said constant shelling was complicating getting aid into Mariupol. There are reports of looting and violent confrontations among civilians over what little basic supplies remain in the city, the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said. Medicines for life-threatening illnesses are quickly running out, hospitals are only partially functioning, and the food and water are in short supply. People were boiling groundwater for drinking, using wood to cook food and burying bodies near where they lay, a staff member for Médecins Sans Frontières in the city said. "We saw people who, because of lack of medication," he said, adding that many people had also been wounded or neighbors just dig a hole in the ground and put the bodies inside. A satellite image provided by Maxa Technologies shows damage to apartment buildings and fires with damage in the Jovnevi district in western Mariupol. AP. New satellite images captured on Saturday showed the extent of the damage caused by Russian shelling on residential parts of the city. In Jivneva district, west of Mariupol, the images show a leafy apartment complex before and after shelling. The trees that once surrounded the buildings appear to have been razed, and smoke can be seen rising from the apartment blocks, which are located across the street from a housing estate. Warehouses across the street also appear to have received damage to their roofs. The apartment buildings pictured before the Russian invasion in June 2021. AP in a nearby street, craters pockmark the snow-coated ground, which is covered in what looks like vehicle tread marks. Another image shows damage to the Mariupol hospital, which was hit by heavy artillery fire last week. A satellite image of damage to the Mariupol hospital after Russian attacks. AP. At least 1,582 civilians in Mariupol alone have been as a result of Russian shelling and a 12-day blockade, the city council said on Friday. It was not possible to verify casualty figures. Loading sirens and tears on Saturday, the exhausted governor of Chernihiv, around 150 kilometers northeast of Kyiv, gave a video update in front of the ruins of a hotel, which he said had been hit that day. "There is no such hotel anymore," Vyacheslav Chaus said, wiping tears from his eyes. "But Ukraine itself still exists, and it will prevail." Russian rocket attacks destroyed a Ukrainian airbase and hit an ammunition depot near the town of Vasilkiv in the Kyiv region on Saturday morning. Interfax Ukraine quoted Vasilkiv Mayor Natalia Balasinovich as saying, Ukraine said it expected a new wave of attacks on the regions around Kyiv, the country's second city Kharkov, and the Donbass region in the east, where Russian-backed separatists have expanded their control. Britain's Ministry of Defence said fighting northwest of the capital continued, with the bulk of Russian ground forces now 25 kilometers from the center of Kyiv, which it has said Russia could attack within days. Anastasia Ereshova cries as she hugs her child in a corridor of a hospital in Mariupol. Anastasia's other child was during Russian shelling of the city. AP Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Sumy and Mariupol remained encircled and under heavy attack.